Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we discuss how the youth of today could be the key to an independent Khalistan in the foreseeable future. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has certainly hit the ground running as he starts his purge of illegal criminal immigrants from the US soil. But is it all too much too quick? And talking of politicians, here in the UK, yet another right-wing politician is called out for his RSS Hindutva extremist links as he refers to Khalistanis as terrorists in Parliament, earning him, unsurprisingly, a barrage of complaints. But we take a look at the latest in a long line of British RSS-influenced politicians. And finally in the Punjab, India's Republic Day is met with Sikh protests across the region, highlighting that deep betrayal of their community back in 1947. All this and more on today's show. But joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. I hope you had an amazing weekend, and we enjoyed our weekend, and a part of it was reading your comments, so keep them coming. We love to read them. Thank you.
Indeed we do. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world, and we will indeed, of course, be taking a look at loads of your great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, let's get the show underway. James, what are you going to start us off with this morning?
Let's take a start with the big mass deportations in the USA, and Trump, after his first week in office, is definitely making waves with those deportations and the arrest of illegal immigrants throughout the country. Now, of course, we know that this is something that has been very clearly stated by Trump throughout the campaign and leading up to his inauguration, and he definitely has not let people down when it comes to that promise and ending out the first week of his administration. The issues that are coming up, though, is essentially when you look at the vast numbers, it's going to be tough on the current budgets to be able to fulfill what the mandate is. So, of course, that leads to question whether or not the Congress is going to approve a very, very substantial increase to the budget for ICE and Homeland Security to deal with the deportations or the incarceration of these illegal immigrants who may be in the U.S. illegally detained, incarcerated while waiting for deportation to their home nation. Now, this, of course, is an issue with some nations refusing to allow the U.S. Immigration flights to land, while others, such as Mexico, have recently come out and disallowed the U.S. to take those flights over Mexico in Mexican airspace, leading to very large and laborious detours by flights. And of course, now for the first time in history, the U.S. is utilizing military aircraft in order to carry out some of the deportations. As we look at that, we're talking about budgets. And this plays into factors because the U.S. government was getting flights at an estimated just under $9,000. And I don't know about that number. I haven't been able to independently verify it, but that is the number being reported in the media. However, we do know that the military flights are costing just under $900,000, and that is for 80 people to be returned. I believe that was Guatemala. And those nationals, basically it works out to $10,000 per individual on that flight. So at those expenditure rates, it's going to eat up that U.S. ICE budget so quickly. One of the ways that they are working around this budget restraint with the mass roundups in American cities is that they are bringing in agents from the IRS, from the DEA, from the FBI, and other areas, including the U.S. military, to handle positions or responsibilities that have previously just been left up to the ICE agents and the Department of Homeland Security. So this is one way. However, that, of course, eats up budgets when it comes to other areas of security and safety for U.S. citizens. So this is not a sustainable way to go about it. And again, it is not going to cover the flight costs and all of that. So it is something that is being worked on, and there is an application and move towards open funding to potentially no limits in order to make sure that this campaign and presidential promise, as Mr. Trump or President Trump brought it forward, is realized. As you can see, that a lot of the individuals being shown in the media are those they accuse of having some type of criminality or the criminal element. But let's not forget that there are other people who are getting caught up in this mess. There are people who have been in the U.S. for generations, or at least for decades, that have built a life. They have contributed to society. They have contributed to the development of the U.S. And unfortunately, the criminal element are the ones that are getting the news coverage and the media coverage, whether that's social media or traditional. They also get play with the politicians because it grabs attention, grabs headlines, and ultimately gets supporters behind them in this ongoing campaign. With that said, of course, we know that there have been historic unsaid regulations when it comes to respecting the sanctity of schools, hospitals, healthcare facilities, churches, and the like. But those are all off the table now. Those protections that were unofficial but have always been respected have now come off the table. This as well could cause problems into the future. When you have the students that are removed from schools by people who are illegally in the country, of course, that takes away their potential for the future. They have a lack of direction, and of course, they may not see a future as opposed to in going to school, education, and further education in the country. As a result, it becomes a breeding ground and an open opportunity for gang recruiters to be able to wave money in front of them and give them a false sense of a future of success. So again, there are some drawbacks to this issue, but again, at this point, Trump is moving forward. We'll have to wait and see whether or not the U.S. And by how much the U.S. Congress allows for the new budget. This, of course, is a very pressing matter with the fact that this is going to be a daily occurrence of flights leaving the U.S. to return people to their home countries. Again, some countries have closed the gates saying, no, we're not allowing the flights to land. Those people will likely remain in custody in the United States, which replaces the previous catch and release program where when they were caught or they reported to Border Patrol and other agencies, they were given notices to appear in front of an immigration panel or an immigration judge and allowed to roam the streets freely. The very, very minimum number of those were the criminal element, but a lot of people, out of fear of being returned, don't report. So the U.S. is also counting on this to pressure a lot of people to either get in and report as they should have been doing, or to remove themselves from the United States and return to their home countries voluntarily and without the cost to the U.S. taxpayers. And that is, of course, a big situation there. And finally, on that note, of course, there's going to be the other costs to the U.S. economy. You're going to have a lot of industries that are without the labor and the workers that they need, whether that's hospitals for cleaners and care aides, through to hospitality, hotels, restaurants, food and beverage services, and right through to construction and other skilled trades as well. So that's going to drive the price up of the labor pool as there becomes less labor and skilled staff available. And it's also going to impact the prices of food because you won't have people to help with clearing the harvest or picking vegetables and fruits and all of that. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out and whether or not the Trump administration looks at some type of adjustment for people who have been working hard, building a life, not involved in criminality, and also don't forget that they contribute to the tax base, to the pension funds and all of that, that they are not ever going to realize those investments. So again, we'll keep an eye on how this is progressing, but that is week one of the big crackdown in the U.S., Angus, and so far, it seems to be moving along at a very rapid pace.
Yeah, it's as I said, Trump has hit the ground running as we predicted he would do. He, of course, has already served one administration, and a lot of that time was just literally him finding his feet. But this time he's hit the ground running because he knows what to expect. He knows the team that he needed, and he's obviously very clearly had a lot of these plans already firmly cemented into place. And all he's done as soon as he's been able to take control of the government, he's unfolded, he's unrolled out his plan. And all he's doing, he's just doing what he was voted in for. Immigration has become, or should we say uncontrolled immigration, has become the hot topic of really the last 5 to 10 years, not just in the US, but across Europe as well. And, across Europe, we suffered exactly the same issues, and they've been dealt with in differing ways. Certainly here in the UK, immigration has been a massive topic. It really influenced the last election because people are just sick and tired. Even people, should we say, on the liberal left have finally realised, many of them realise, actually, we can't just keep these doors open to people pouring in, not least criminals pouring in, because we just don't have the infrastructure to support it. And this is what has swept Trump into power. So all he's doing now, he's unrolling his policies as he promised he would do. And the fact he's doing it so quickly, I think really, as I often say, Trump does what he says on the tin. He says, I will do what you elected me for, and this is what he's doing. It's very interesting. And I think also his tactic is very clever and actually perfectly transparent, really, when you think about it. Yeah, the cost of this, as it stands at the moment, is unsustainable. If you extrapolate $10,000 per immigrant, illegal immigrant that you're exporting back to their home countries, then of course it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars overall to export every illegal immigrant. But in reality, all he's doing, and he said this actually quite up front, he said, look, we were going to target the worst offenders, the actual criminals, the genuine criminals who are bringing in criminality into the US. They're not just illegal immigrants, they're also importing their criminality. They're setting up drug gangs, they're setting up criminal gangs, organised crime, all these sorts of things. So that's his main target. And in many ways, they're actually should we say, the low-hanging fruit as well. So, of course, they are going to be the most expensive to deport, to round up and deport. But what it does do, it's sending out a very, very powerful message. And again, I've always said that Trump is all about the optics. He's sending out, by doing this in the most aggressive manner, he's sending out a message to everybody, to governments internationally, and of course to the people within the United States who are living there illegally. He's saying, you can run, but you can't hide. We're coming for you. And what this is doing, as he predicted, it means that a lot of immigrants now are going to think, my time's up. I either turn myself in, or I better flee the country before I get arrested and thrown out. So it's actually a lot of the work is going to be done for him purely by his physical show of strength. And I think that is what a lot of this is about. It's demonstrating to the illegal immigrant population, we're coming for you. So you either leave of your own accord, or we will find you and we will throw you out forcefully. And I think that is going to work to a large extent. And I think even Trump realises and acknowledges that, of course, he's not going to get rid of every single illegal immigrant. But even if he just gets rid of the majority of them, he's actually done an awful lot more than the previous administration did. And what's fascinating is you read a lot of the comments, even in the liberal media, where they reported on these stories, and they show videos of ICE going in there, arresting these guys from what they call sanctuary cities, these cities that have actually deliberately provided a home for these illegal immigrants, in full knowledge of who they are, criminals and illegals. They've let them stay there. All they've done is they've now sent ICE in, they've arrested, and they've taken them out. And actually all the people are saying, it was that easy. We didn't realise that's all it took to get rid of these people, because the Biden administration, the will wasn't there. And this is why Trump has swept to power, because Biden was so lackadaisical. He just didn't care. He just said, yeah, whatever, In they poured, in came that criminality. And that's what's turned America primarily right-wing because of this, because they said, we just got to stop this. So, yeah, it was literally as simple as that, to deport these people. Now, one other element I want to touch on here is, and we've talked about the message that it sends to the illegal immigrant population within America. It's also sending a message to those outside America who were thinking of illegally migrating into America. Don't bother trying, because not only is that wall going to be built, but you land here, we're going to find you and we're going to throw you out. So again, it's the deterrence. He's actually setting up this massive deterrent message saying don't bother even trying. And that in itself, again, is going to help stem that tide of illegal immigration. And also his repatriation flights. We talk about Mexico, we talk about Colombia. Colombia's an interesting one. Recently, the Colombian president turned back some of these deportation flights, said no, we're not going to let you land. Well, Trump turned around and said, right, fine, okay, then we're going to impose 25% tariffs on all trade coming from Colombia. And if you still don't let these flights land, in 1 week's time, I'm going to increase it to 50%. And what has Colombia done? Yeah, all right, okay. This is the power of a powerful leader getting things done, producing results. Colombia has actually had to not just acquiesce, not just to let these flights land, but actually Trump has forced the Colombian government to send their own planes to repatriate. So in fact, Trump isn't even going to have to pay for it anymore. Is that Colombia has been now arm-twisted, strong-armed into sending flights to repatriate their illegal criminal immigrants. So again, James, yeah, it's a very powerful message. It is working, and and again, you didn't even have to be a supporter of Trump. At least you got to acknowledge he is delivering on what he's promised. And I have to say, here in Europe, we are watching certainly I would say probably the majority of people across Europe who are now anti-illegal immigration, whatever their political stance, and they do sit on both sides of the political spectrum. Most people across Europe now are saying enough is enough, and they are looking almost in envy at the United States, saying finally there is a leader there who is actually doing something about this. Our own weak leadership here in Europe, particularly Keir Starmer, who's absolutely pathetic, I have to say, on this stance, just like the Conservative Party before him. 14 years of pathetic Conservative leadership who did absolutely nothing except let more in. A million came in last year, 1 million people into our tiny island. So this is why it's a big topic, James, and this is why I think Trump is really leading the way on this.
Absolutely, Angus, and I'm all for controlled immigration. I think that Canada has taken a lot of steps as well to reduce the numbers in the coming years. Whether that's going to get upheld by the incoming administration in Canada, we'll have to wait and see on that. Do I agree with all of the tactics being used in the U.S. or all of the families being targeted? I don't, and that's no big secret. But overall, I think that it is a much overdue and required necessity. It's one of those, one of those lesser evils of dealing with it and trying to put a curb on it. And we'll see how that plays out. But with that, of course, that leads us to looking towards the future, and that's for anybody to guess, anybody to assume, or anybody to try to direct. But let's take a look at a different part of the future, and that, of course, is the youth of today, who may very well be the very strong leaders of Khalistan tomorrow and into the future. And I don't mean literally tomorrow, but in the proverbial sense. And that is because of some of the methodology being used by the Indian media, by the India government, and other people around the world that are involved in foreign interference, transnational repression, and other issues that are meant to divide. And this is where the youth, and here we're specifically speaking more about the Sikh youth, and that is the fact that they are learning. They are catching on to the plays by this nefarious group that is the government of India, with their machines and their bots and their basically boiler rooms of misinformation that they are spreading on the internet. Unfortunately, it took the death of several very prominent Sikh leaders to make this happen for the mainstream. But this is something that the Sikh youth have been seeing for generations. As they've grown to adults, they've shared with the next generation and brought this realization that now the world is recognizing, and they can sit back and say, finally, we are being listened to. And you know So that is really empowering the youth of today. They are realizing that there is an opportunity to speak out. There is an opportunity to challenge the old-fashioned or the traditional narrative, to say, no, this is not the truth that you're hearing from India. This is not the truth you're hearing from the RSS and RAW. This is not the truth, and it can go on and on. And that is one of the things that now is working in favor of the Khalistan movement. And that is that the world is now watching. We are listening to all people of the Sikh religion and culture and history, and we're saying we were wrong in ignoring and not taking more time to be aware of and understand the historic wrongs that have been done through whether that's the partition of 1947 and other incidents throughout history. Now, the youth are able to look at that, and they are able to start dissecting what they are seeing on social media and in traditional media. They are calling out the lies. Now, youth are going to not so much do it within their peer groups and within their social structure, because of the fact that they don't want to be ostracized when the majority may believe one thing and they are speaking out trying to explain the difference and how that is the mainstream thinking it was wrong. So what they do is they are now empowered through the use of social media, online digital platforms, chatting, and so much more, that they can actually spread the truth and the true narrative through the click of a post button on their phone or their computer. That allows them to regain that sense of knowledge and that sense of contribution to the movement. And at the end of the day, the human nature is that we want to seem smarter than the next person. We want to be able to correct people when they're wrong. And sometimes there are places where we start to get a bit older and we just ignore the noise, the outside noise, and we just pay no attention to it. And instead, what happens is that it gets ignored. It doesn't get the mainstream media coverage. It doesn't get the conversations around the dinner tables. It is totally ignored. So that's where today's youth are definitely leading the way in just breaking down the misinformation, the lies, and everything else, and speaking out against all of this foreign interference, and also sharing that knowledge with the world. They are taking a lead, and we need to watch how this works, because they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They are going to be the ones who are inheriting Khalistan in the next generation and making it a place that the world will look up to and be a place of envy by all nations, in how they treat minorities, how they bring equality to women, to everyone in the society, how they don't continue the pattern of oppression that they have been subjected to for generations. And that, I think, is really, really important, and how the youth of today are going to be stronger leaders for tomorrow by the use and proper understanding of how social media and technology can work, as long as they are aware of how it can also work in the negative form, take time to research and develop truth and to share that truth with others. So let's take a quick look here, Angus, at video here. And this is some of today's youth. This is actually interviews that were done at the Khalistan referendum at the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia, during the referendum vote. But these interviews were from the archives. I cut them down a bit just to fit into a short video here to demonstrate how the youth are feeling about Khalistan, how they are feeling about today's society, and how they view the future as full of opportunity and as the glass half full, not half empty.
So yeah, we live in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen. So I find like we should be having a similar opportunity for vote for our homeland Punjab. As a Canadian, as a Quebecer, have a same right in their referendum, as they can speak if they want to separate from Canada, the same we want to enjoy it too. But I want to add on the points the gentleman who speak before me on the gun barrel with the pen piercing. The same thing, the United Nations. If you go to the headquarters of United Nations, on the front they have a gun, which they turn it down. So we are same campaigning as United Nations is campaigning against gun violence. So that is all, our campaign is same. We are campaigning non-violence with the pen. So that's what we are doing. So as the United Nations is campaigning for anti-gun violence, as they have in their headquarters, so as same we have it in our in the poster you can see.
And what is it that brought you up to volunteer?
You want to answer first?
So for me, it's just been always been close to my culture from the beginning. I've been born in a Sikh family, and I'm proud to represent that. So I'm here now because we have the right to vote and do something for ourselves and make our own Khalistan. And I think that's a great opportunity that I'm here present for something big like this that should have been happening, I think, years ago.
And do you think that that there's a resonance with the younger community to come out and vote as well, being that, of course, they're going to be the ones that are moving forward in the future and running the countries and running, everything. So do you think that there's really a big interest in the youth movement and the youth interest in Khalistan, vote one way or the other?
I think yes, and since Deep Sidhu, he was killed by Indian state, and then Sidhu Moosewala, after that I felt there's a huge movement going on in favor of Khalistan, and Sikh youth especially, they are more aware about what's happening and what Indian government is doing to us, and they are fighting for their own state, Khalistan.
And I think not just for Sikh youth, I think all youth, especially living in Surrey or cities like this where there's a big dominance of Punjabi culture, I think there's a lot on social media and things like that, and hearing through your close friends and everything, that there's a lot of impact from like what we hear and all these posters that are up now and all this cultural movement that involves a lot of youth, not just Sikh youth, but like a lot of other youth that are just involved with their friends here, and that's a big impact for us.
So I'm from here. I'm 3. So this is my daughter, Gurnaaz.
Yep, and my name's Ikjot Singh. I'm from Ikjot Singh. Yep, and I'm from New Zealand.
From New Zealand?
Yeah.
What brings you to Surrey?
It's just that for the voting that's going on here. Yeah, we came from New Zealand for the voting. Yep. So we want to vote for Khalistan. What?
I said, so you're here to give a good support to the community?
Yes.
And have you guys had a vote in New Zealand yet?
No.
Yeah.
No, not
Yeah.
And what was it that...
Go ahead. My name is Deep Singh Dhillon. My name is Bisman Singh Dhillon. So we're from Brampton, Toronto, and so we just came here in support, and we just want to stress that the whole purpose of the referendum, the Khalistan referendum, is an answer to those people who claim, or those countries and people that claim that the Sikhs, the actual Sikhs, don't want Khalistan, and that this is an extremist movement created by some people to divide the nation. So we can see in Brampton and in Toronto, even multiple different news media outlets have said and explained how successful the referendum was, and how people came in so many numbers to express that no, this is the voice of the Sikh community, and that we've had enough. We want nothing to do with India anymore, because on every single turn throughout our history, we've been discriminated against, and we've been killed, and we can see it's even reached onto Canadian soil, where our this Gurdwara's president is shot and killed.
Yeah, and just to add on, and I'd just like to add on, one of my final points is recently in the news we saw an RCMP, a former RCMP officer was arrested for trying to act on behalf of the Chinese government in terms of foreign interference on Canadian soil. He was blackmailing individuals on their behalf, and he was arrested very promptly. And I'm hoping that the Canadian government has the same response for the killers of Shahid by Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was a peaceful advocate of the 2020 referendum, and they do arrest those individuals because we take foreign interference very seriously, being Canadian citizens ourselves. It's very important that no foreign government, foreign national government comes and tries to advocate on its behalf illegally. We've seen this before. You can read books on this. There was a report by the WSO, World Sikh Organization, where they talked about a Canadian report where a Hindu or an Indian national was denied permanent residency in Canada because he was given instructions by the RAW, which is the intelligence agency of India, to perpetrate, to infiltrate Sikh temples, Sikh communities, and to spread propaganda. So it's very important that this misinformation is defeated, because it's happened in the past and it will continue to happen in the future.
So there we go, Angus. Very well put by the youth. It demonstrates a clear understanding of what's going on, but it also shows a very well stated response to the issue and why they feel it's important for the future of the Sikh community and for themselves personally. I think that it shows a very positive outlook for the future of Khalistan and for the youth of today, Angus.
Yeah, I think it's very impressive when you hear a lot of the Sikh youth speak publicly, because they're very articulate, and they're also, many of them are so well researched that clearly they care. You know, they really are quite passionate about the Khalistan cause. As indeed there should be. And I think there's a real divide here. And I think we need to identify this divide. There are those living in the Punjab and in India, and there are those living outside in the diaspora. Now, of course, if you're outside in the diaspora, you are subjected to a much freer press. In the democratic world, we have, on the whole, a pretty free press. So actually, you are seeing at least a relatively balanced argument about international affairs, about India, etc., etc. It's a lot easier to access the truth. Of course, in India, it's a very different story. You go around and interview the youth in India and the youth in Punjab, they of course are subjected to the Godi media. They are only fed one side of the narrative. So the real battleground here, and this really is a battleground, it's a battle for the minds of the youth, and this is often played out across so many different political spheres and political battlegrounds, targeting the youth. It's indoctrinating the youth, the next generation, into your worldview. And we've seen this in many areas. The European Union was a prime example of this. It knew full well it needed to indoctrinate the youth of Europe, so it ensured that all schools across Europe, including here in the UK, were filled with pro-EU, European Union propaganda. It was actually to the point of actually making a lot of us very uncomfortable with this sort of indoctrination that was occurring. It was really quite insidious, actually. But that leads on to another interesting, a wonderful law that I have always lived by, and I witness on a regular basis the older I get. And that is the law of unintended consequences. This is a wonderful law, and I have to say one of my favourite laws in life is that it doesn't matter how powerful a body, an entity, a political movement, whatever it is, or a government, it doesn't matter how powerful they are and how successfully they think they've imposed something, the law of unintended consequences always, almost without exception, kicks in. Prime example of this was COVID and lockdown. Clearly there was a very powerful agenda there, all about controlling the population, about restructuring society, global society, into what they call the Great Reset. And you don't even need to go down conspiratorial routes to work out clearly there was a big agenda going on here. And that agenda was very clearly to restructure, should we say, the global population and how society functions in certain ways, very pro-environment, etc. In reality, the law of unintended consequences struck in, and actually society has restructured in many, many different ways, but in many ways that have been completely unpredictable. And I don't want to go down that argument because there's a lot to talk about, which is not really relevant today. But what I would say is, using that as an example, is the Godi media is this massively powerful machine that is intending to indoctrinate the whole youth of India, and indeed the adults as well, but certainly aimed at the youth, to indoctrinate them, in particular in the Punjab, whether it's through the schools or whatever. Similar idea to the EU. They're filling schools with the pro-Modi, pro-BJP, pro-RSS, pro-Hindutva propaganda, thinking they're indoctrinating the youth. But the law of unintended consequences will no doubt kick in. You can't beat human nature. These young will grow up probably questioning everything that they've been told. So it might not work as well as they think. And that is, I think, is really the clue to about all this. And I think coming out back outside of India, back into the diaspora, it's very important then that, and I'm very encouraged and feel very optimistic about the Khalistan movement, because I think a lot of the youth really are seeing it for what it is. It really is. It's a cry for freedom. It is a cry for sovereignty. It is a cry against all the betrayals that have been meted out against the Sikh community for decades and generations. In fact, probably going back centuries, actually. We can go back to the original empire. And I think, and I say I feel very optimistic that it is young and each successive generation of youth that are seeing what it is and realising what's been done to the community, and they're saying, look, we've got to do something about this. Now, the real enemy of all this isn't just the BJP Hindutva RSS. It's something a bit more subtle than that. It is indifference. And I think the biggest fear for anything, any movement, is indifference. It's, well, why should we care? We don't care. I've actually seen this in many areas, is the young say, why should we care? We don't care. It is absolutely imperative that the Sikh community, the older generations, make sure that their young never forget, they are fully educated and informed what has happened to the Sikh community in the Punjab since not just 1947, but even going back before that. It's very important they understand the history. They particularly understand what happened in 1984 and subsequent to that, through the 1980s and 1990s. Because when they are educated, they understand why it matters. Why is Khalistan so important? Because at the moment, if they don't know the history, they don't know the history behind the culture, their cultural identity, they don't know the betrayals, they will not feel motivated. They will be indifferent. That's the enemy, indifference. And I think it's so important that people like us, James, help this mass movement to educate, to inform, to get the young generation to understand why it matters, why it's so important, why is Khalistan so important. And that is the big, that's the driving force, that's the driving motivation, James. We must make the young feel that it is important. They must care about it. But as I say, I do feel very optimistic, and it's wonderful seeing that video of the young men and women being interviewed and actually feeling passionate and actually being able to articulate very clearly why they feel so strongly about Khalistan. Well, of course, as we know, it is a very powerful argument. It's very hard to argue against it.
Absolutely, and by empowering them to be involved in the process also gives them a bigger sense of accomplishment and ownership when Khalistan happens, and therefore they've got a vested interest in the success of it in the future.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, on that note, James, let's move on now as time is marching on. Let's move on to my first story, and I want to stay with politics, but I'm going to move on to British politics. Yes, this dirty swamp of politicians and politics that we've had to suffer for so long. Now, it's been well known amongst the Sikh community. The Sikh community, as a generalisation, tend to support the Labour Party, the left wing. Primarily because the Conservative Party on the right wing has actually over successive generations just proved itself to be a bit of an enemy of the Sikh community. It's and again, it goes back to partition in 1947, but we've seen it through the 1980s, 90s, and even today. It is still a deep stain on the Conservative Party. This sort of almost inexplicable persecution of the Sikh communities, particularly here in the UK. Now, I want to show you actually, this is, and when I started researching this, I was quite shocked actually with one of the many things that I uncovered. And I uncovered an awful lot, a lot of which we don't have time, unfortunately, to put in today. But let me play you this video. You may recognise this lady from the 1980s.
You are fortunate. You have a great religion, a great culture. And therefore you're always aware that there's something more important than life than self. And that is the way to live. And I am very happy that this evening that you've invited me to come and celebrate your great culture and your great message with you. I know that you contribute a great deal to the belief in these things in this country, and we're very grateful for the way in which you keep it alive and in which you pass it on.
etc., etc. Yes, of course, Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher, very controversial figure when it comes to Sikh community, because, of course, 1984, she was the Prime Minister during 1984, the outrageous attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib. And, of course, as has subsequently been uncovered, it is likely that the British Armed Forces, under her governance, assisted the Indian military during that attack, or at least provided consultancy services at the very least. So Margaret Thatcher, a Conservative Prime Minister, again addressing the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, an RSS outfit. But it doesn't stop at Margaret Thatcher. We fast forward even to 2014, just 11 years ago. Priti Patel, again, another Conservative MP. She actually then ultimately became the Home Secretary for the UK, for the British government, the Conservative government at the time. She also, likewise, addressed the same group, the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, this RSS outlet. And after doing so, she actually sent an official letter on her own official letterhead, and it said, "Message from Priti Patel, MP, the Prime Minister's UK Indian diaspora champion for the event. RSS, a vision in action, a new dawn." And she finished off this very profusively complimentary letter by saying, "I'd like to welcome Sri Hasabali to the UK once more, applaud the HSS UK for hosting this event, and wish the members my very best, especially as we approach the bright lights of Diwali." So again, another Conservative, powerful Conservative MP supporting the RSS. Fast forward again, 2021, Mary Robinson, another Conservative MP, seen at an HSS Seva UK fundraiser event. And again, I think likely that a lot of these MPs are doing this out of sheer ignorance. They clearly do not really fully understand what it is they're supporting at the moment. I mean, for example, Mary Robinson, in her defence, I think is likely thinking, oh, it's just a minority, but I've got to be seen to be supporting minorities. Clearly has absolutely no idea, really, of who the RSS are and what they represent. It's just politicians being politicians. And I won't say the same about Priti Patel. She is of Indian descent. She is fully aware of who the RSS are. So there's no defence whatsoever on the part of Priti Patel. Let's fast forward to Theresa Williams, again, probably another one doing it out of ignorance, planting trees with the HSS in April 2022. On her website, she describes the HSS as a movement for young people which aims to inculcate Hindu values of selfless service to the community. Again, only it sounds wonderful on paper, of course, this group who are doing wonderful selfless service. In reality, again, I don't think that Theresa Williams actually has any clue of the evils of what the RSS Hindutva agenda really is. She just sees somebody that she assumed was just doing good. In fact, again, she's not looking behind the scenes. She's not peeling back the layers. Actually, who is this HSS organisation? But it's not just Conservative MPs. Yes, even Labour has the odd MP guilty of same. For example, in 2016, Barry Gardiner of the Labour Party, I remember Barry Gardiner, attended an event marking 50 years of the HSS. The RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, was also in attendance and addressed this event. So even a Labour MP in support of this RSS outfit, this RSS front. Interestingly, this was the same event mentioned that Bob Blackman, a current Conservative MP, was in attendance. Now, Bob Blackman, who is Bob Blackman? Well, it turns out Bob Blackman, this serving MP, has rather upset the Sikh community once again. So not only is he following the footsteps of a long line of Conservative politicians who have actively gone out there to not just deliberately offend the Sikh community, but actually to totally misrepresent them and do everything in their power to make life harder for the Sikh community. Well, Bob Blackman has actually gone a step further. Now, the Sikh Federation UK has actually launched a formal complaint against Mr. Bob Blackman because Bob Blackman stood up in Parliament after these protests against this film Emergency. Remember, we've been talking about Kangana Ranaut's current film Emergency, which is this complete misrepresentation of Indira Gandhi and what Indira Gandhi was up to. Well, all the Sikh community's protests that were peaceful outside all these cinemas, and then on the rare occasions they've actually gone into the cinemas and demanded the films to be stopped, but they were peaceful. Bob Blackman stood up in Parliament and he called these protesters Khalistan terrorists. Those are the actual words he used. He labelled these protesters and blanket labelled anybody supporting the Khalistan movement as terrorists. Now, how else are you going to go out and really offend any more deeply a whole community, a whole democratic movement, by labelling them as terrorists? Now, it turns out Blackman, who is a Conservative MP, is a Conservative MP of Harrow. That's in the west of London. Harrow is colloquially called Mini Gujarat, because it has a large Indian diaspora population. And of course, a lot coming from Gujarat. Gujarat, that same state where Modi and many other people in the BJP government hail from originally. And Blackman actually has a history of anti-Sikh statements and meeting with RSS and other Hindu extremists. And he's previously actually been exposed from taking funds from Indian nationalist groups. He's had a known relationship with the RSS since at least 1992. In 2016, he attended an event in Hertfordshire here in the UK, marking 50 years since the HSS, again this front for the RSS in the UK, since the HSS was established. And again, Mohan Bhagwat, the RSS chief, was also in attendance. And he's spoken out. He's been very vocal about a lot of the Sikh issues, and particularly relevant to our show that we talk a lot about the Free Jaggi campaign. Jagtar Singh Johal, he's been arbitrarily detained in India. He's spoken out against Jaggi, actually not supporting the fact that he's arbitrarily detained, but he's actually branded Jaggi as a terrorist, another Khalistani terrorist. I mean, how offensive can you get? And actually, there've been a lot, I have to say, well done to a lot of the Sikh organisations who've done a lot of digging about Bob Blackman and what he's been up to. But he has been found to be taking money from the HSS and from the BJP. And as a result, he's very supportive of the BJP. He's very supportive of the RSS agenda. He's very vocal and very vocal about the Sikh community in a very negative sense. He was found to have taken at least £22,000, that's about $30,000 from organisations tied to Hindutva militants, according to a Byline Times investigation. Blackman has been called out by Sikhs in recent times for regurgitating Indian state propaganda on the farmers' protests. Yes, he was very vocal about the farmers' protests, condemning the farmers for protesting, and of course the Free Jaggi Now issue, which he was very vocal about. He is the MP for Harrow East, and as I've said, he is an area often referred to as Mini Gujarat due to its demographics, which includes a significant Hindu community. And notorious Indian nationalist far-right figures, remember I talked about Priti Patel? Yeah, lo and behold, she actually is of Gujarat origin again. So it's again, we've often talked about the Gujarat mafia. Well, of course, Narendra Modi, Priti Patel, even the Bishnoi hails from Gujarat. The Byline Times investigation found Blackman had taken donations from the likes of the Indian High Commission. Yes, once again, the diplomatic infrastructure misused and abused by the RSS. So he's been taking donations from the Indian High Commission of the UK. You have to ask, why would a High Commission of India be paying a British MP? From the Seva International, a charity branch of the RSS, and the International Siddhashram Shakti Centre, a group affiliated with the Overseas Friends of the BJP group. Blackman's influence from Indian nationalist groups is actually pretty obvious. Let me just play you a video. This is quite an interesting video. Have a look at this.
Blackman, MP for Harrow East, just wishing Sri Narendra Modi every success in the elections in India coming up in April and May. I look forward to BJP winning the election again and Sri Narendra Modi being Prime Minister for yet another 5 years for the benefit of India and the UK.
So that's Bob Blackman interfering in Indian politics. He's actually actively campaigning, as a British Conservative MP, he's actively campaigning before the last Indian election for the BJP. He's urging people to vote for the BJP. So much for impartiality or interfering with another nation's politics. It's believed, he is believed also to have been behind the sharing of a fact sheet. This is back to the farmers' protest. He shared this so-called fact sheet about the farmers, which basically pushed an Indian state narrative. And again, it was just misinformation. He deliberately perpetuated misinformation about the protesting farmers. He likewise did the same about Jagtar Singh Johal, who he claimed was a member of a Khalistan group that were a bunch of terrorists. Yes, he actually branded Jaggi as being a terrorist. Again, I shake my head in utter disbelief. And even to the extent where Jaggi's local MP, a Labour MP at the time, is since been deselected, Martin Doherty Hughes, he actually had to state that Blackman was acting as a spokesperson for a foreign country, which is a very strong thing for a British MP to say about another MP. But he's basically saying, look, you've got to stop this because you're effectively acting as a spokesperson for a foreign country. It's actually pretty appalling, this. And again, the evidence just rolls on and on across social media. And again, I have to thank the Sikh Council UK for their wonderful campaign for digging out the dirt, the truth, really, of what he's been up to. And they've catalogued and archived a lot of, not just Bob Blackman, but of many British politicians and their pro-RSS stance. And once again, another video I'd like to show you. This is Bob Blackman yet again. Have a look at this one.
It's very, very important in that process to make sure that we up the turnout of the BJP supporters and that we seek BJP votes in every single state. It's not just concentrating on one or two. You've got to win states and win seats in states that you're not expecting to do so. So I want you to go away from here tonight with one message in your minds, and that is, how can I convince 100 people to make sure they vote BJP during those elections?
Again, Bob Blackman, Conservative British MP, giving electoral advice to BJP supporters or to the Hindu community on how to go out and win the Indian election. Again, it's absolutely appalling, this. I'm absolutely horrified to uncover this. And unsurprisingly, the Sikh Federation UK, and I've got to be quick about this because we're running out of time, we're way over time, but they launched an official complaint about, specifically about Bob Blackman's standing up in Parliament and referring to the emergency film protesters as Khalistan terrorists. They launched this official complaint saying, look, he just cannot get away with this. He's actually bringing Parliament into disrepute, which actually breaks the 11th rule of conduct, as they say, and is actually falling below the standards expected of a Member of Parliament with respect to consideration of the public interest, the second rule of conduct, etc., etc. And the official complaint goes at great length. It actually refers to what we talked about last week, James, the United Nations report into India, where the UNHCR, the human rights organisation part of the United Nations, investigated India's transnational repression, and they wrote a very, very powerful report setting out how India had been breaking international law with its transnational repression. Again, this is brought up in this same complaint, again to the House of Parliament and the Speaker and the Standards Committee, saying, look, you've got to admonish this MP. He cannot get away with this. As they say, the deliberate use of the phrase Khalistani terrorist by Bob Blackman, who is protected by parliamentary privilege, is aimed at unfairly demonising those campaigning for the re-establishment of a Sikh homeland and incorrectly describing peaceful protesters as terrorists. This use of an inaccurate and offensive phrase in Parliament is also not in the public interest from a British historical context. And again, the letter details how, again, the British betrayed the Sikhs and when they handed over India to the Brahmins. What an enormous betrayal, and what actually a debt of honour, as I keep talking about, this debt of honour that the British government actually owes to the Sikh community, that they actually should be supporting the Khalistan stance, this democratic, peaceful movement for Khalistan, because actually that is essentially what the British promised, even during partition and pre-partition, etc., etc. So there you go, James, the dirty swamp of British politics, but particularly those indoctrinated, influenced, and even paid by the RSS to spread RSS division and hatred and anti-Sikh sentiment.
You know, and if you watch that story there, I mean, you can go back to the elegance that Margaret Thatcher always exuded in the way that she presented herself, whether you agree with her politics or not. And there's a lot of things I didn't agree with and a lot of things I didn't like. But then you contrast that era compared to today, and I don't know if you've ever had the Baby Huey cartoons in the UK, but look it up if you haven't, because that's who Blackman reminds me of, the way he's dressed, and he just needs the little propeller on his hat.
I know where you're coming from, James.
But again, it's all about putting out that public image. And I mean, you know, you can look at Al Capone, you can look at Pablo Escobar. They all did good in the community to get their names in the paper to make them look good. And that's what the RSS was doing in those puff pieces, as we call them.
Indeed, RSS are masters at this. They have this public front, this sort of supposed selfless service, this charitable front. But of course, behind that is the actual evil organisation. Even the Nazi Party in the 1930s Germany had a charitable front. They had this very benign front. But of course, behind that were the evils of Nazi Germany. And likewise, the RSS Hindutva are exactly the same. They know how to play a population, how to seduce a population on the side. So, okay, James, let's move on to my second story. And I'm going to have to whip through this very quickly as we're well over time. Protest marches. India Republic Day was yesterday, January the 26th, where India and India alone, and by that I don't include the Punjab, India celebrated India Republic Day. It was the adoption of the constitution that was not signed by the Sikh community for reasons that we talk about on a regular basis. And as a result, the Sikh community were out there in force protesting against the signing of the constitution, to highlight to the public that the Sikh community did not support the Indian constitution, that it does not represent the Sikh community. So they were out, they took to the streets. As a result of taking the streets, there have been all sorts of arrests. Despite restrictions of the Indian government, they still did manage to actually reach out into the streets across the Punjab. And the Punjab police did impose restrictions across Gurdaspur by detaining Sikh leaders under preventive custody and putting some leaders under house arrest. So again, typical Indian tactics. As soon as they heard that there was going to be protests, they preempt this by going and arresting the leaders. Yeah, this is democracy in action. This is Indian democracy in action. But having said that, the good news is the news has got out. It's leaked out across the world. It's not in mainstream media, of course. It's not a big enough story to hit Western mainstream media. But of course, outlets like ours are picking up on this story, highlighting the fact, once again, James, Indian democracy in action is that the Sikh community have never signed up to the Indian constitution. They do not believe in the Indian constitution, because watch my podcast from last week where we highlighted how the Indian constitution has been used and indeed abused to persecute the Sikh community, and indeed actually legally justify the murder of Sikhs, believe it or not. Watch my podcast from last week. And of course, Sikh community is standing up once again in protest, as they do, standing up against injustice, taking to the streets. India reacting by arresting democratic protest. Happy to say also here in the UK, James, there have been all sorts of calls prior to the weekend to go protest. And in fact, there were protests in London, various other locations across the UK, where the Sikh community got together and were actively protesting to publicly reject the Indian constitution. And again, that was also, I think there were protests organised in Vancouver, in your neck of the woods, James. Likewise, a Khalistan freedom rally. Of course, the rejection of the constitution comes hand in hand with the pro-Khalistan movement. And so delighted to say that there were gatherings at Indian embassies, particularly in the UK, Canada, USA, Australia, Italy and other areas, where again the public were educated as to why the Sikh community have rejected the Indian constitution, and of course the Khalistan flags out in force, James. Always very healthy to see.
Absolutely. And yeah, it is a bright and colorful, a cheerful flag to a point. And I think that really helps to get the attention of passerbys, to expand on the knowledge of how they were left out of the Constitution in India, as well as the direction that they're going in the movement for Khalistan as a whole.
Indeed, absolutely. So, okay, we're well behind time. So I'm going to move on to the comments section. And one area of the comments, actually, talking about the Punjab, one area that we talked about last week, and it was a comment that came in, actually, talking about Amritpal Singh, who'd been quite, I'm trying to think of the appropriate word, rude is probably the easiest way to say it. It's quite rude about the Christian community. And of course, it sort of goes against the fundamentals of Sikhi to be offensive to another religion. Sikhi is all about being tolerant and completely understanding of other religions and supporting people to become better followers of their respective religions. So it did sit a little bit anomalously that Amritpal Singh would so publicly rebuke the Christian faith. Well, I have to thank many of our commenters and correspondents who've actually provided a little bit more flesh on the bones, a little bit more information about actually what this was about, what Amritpal Singh had actually said. One of our correspondents through email who wanted to remain anonymous gave a lot of background to this, and I just want to jump ahead to what he said. He said, look, the Christianity in Punjab is not the same Christianity as you'll find in southern India, which was in fact introduced by Matthew, disciple Matthew. St. Peter went to Rome, Matthew to India, the two most advanced and richest places on the earth at that time. Christianity in Punjab is not associated with any Christian denomination in the West or anywhere else. Punjab Christianity is preached that every problem or difficulty is due to demons. They hold gatherings to exorcise demons and spirits from troubled souls. So it actually, what you're saying here is much more the extremist end of the Christian faith. Amritpal Singh was interviewed. His question was, if a pastor can save people from demons, then why Ishu Messi or Jesus could not save himself from the cross? So again, it's actually quite a reasonable question. It's saying if you can save people from demons, then why couldn't you save Jesus if you're that powerful? And the pastor responded that Amritpal Singh was committing blasphemy. On camera, Amritpal replied, if the pastor can call Sikhs and Sikh gurus Satan and order their followers not to associate with Sikhs, then I can criticise them and ask them questions. And interesting, I did not hear Amritpal Singh say Christians. He addressed pastors who were promising something Christianity left behind, exorcism in Middle Ages. I think this is a very interesting insight. And I'm going to move quickly on to another comment that we received from Amakaira. Again, one of our commenters who always gives very well-researched and very detailed comments. And Amakaira said, look, what he said was actually, as we suspected, James, it was taken out of context. He wasn't attacking the Christian faith. He wasn't attacking real Christians. He was talking about methods of conversion by these fake Christian pastors who call Sikhi Satan, Shaitan, or Shaitan, same in Urdu. They preach only in small villages and the poorer, uneducated areas of Punjab, where people are more vulnerable to it. They have a huge funding, probably government funded, where they're converting poorer Sikhs, Hindus and Dalits by offering financial incentives to convert. You can see for yourself on YouTube, they draw huge crowds, practicing a kind of mass hypnotism, making it, they feel like they've had encounters with the Holy Spirit. They start trembling, they shake, they fall to the ground. They claim to have healing powers, fake miracles. The crowds go wild, they get really agitated, etc. And you talk about one example, seeing a child who claimed to be dead, but actually, in fact, was risen, allegedly rose from the dead, but in fact it looked like a child who'd been drugged rising up. And then the crowd actually believed the pastor brought him back to life. They've converted the Bible into Punjabi, okay, but they call it the Yeshu Granth. Now, why do they use the word Granth? Of course, we're referring here to the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the Holy Scriptures of Sikhi. So why they use that same word Granth? Because it's an ongoing attempt to misappropriate Sikh culture. When someone converts to Sikhi, they change their name to a Sikh name, but when these pastors convert Sikhs to Christianity, they make them keep their names as Singh or Kaur to keep their dastar, so the Christians who look like Sikhs. And again, it's all part of this dilution of the Sikh community. So, James, the message here, and I think this is very clear, this actually reflects what I see here in the West. Christianity is made up of different sects. There is the old traditional dinosaurs, as I call it, which is the traditional old Christian church. And then at the very sharp end, the extreme end, we see this particularly in the deep south in the US, these very what's the word I'm looking for? Very powerful pastors who have these extremely well-attended churches, very much commercially driven, very much financial enterprises. They make millions of dollars, these things. And these are very much the shaking, agitated audiences where they claim to do miracles. It's very much this, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the name, Jez. You might think of it. It's this part of Christianity. Evangelical, that's the word. Evangelical, it's the evangelical church.
The words I was thinking of were probably not fit for our show, Angus.
I was trying not to reach into that bucket of vocabulary. Evangelical church. It's the evangelists. I'm trying not to offend the evangelists because there are some very good people in the evangelical church, but there is a very nasty end of evangelism, which is the extreme end. And I think this is what we've seen here in the Punjab. It's the extremist Christians who, and I wonder, who have got links maybe to the right wing of India, who are following that same agenda. And it's the extremist Christians that Amritpal Singh is targeting, who's been criticising. So he's not criticising the Christian faith, he's criticising this very extremist end that deals with exorcising demons, etc., etc., claims to raise people from the dead, claims to miraculously cure people by channeling the Holy Spirit. It's, of course, complete nonsense, I'm afraid. I have to say it's complete nonsense. But it is these people who are targeting the vulnerable parts of society, those people who are desperately looking for a message, looking for God, looking for something to fulfill, obviously, what is missing in their lives. They're very easily seduced by this extremist religion. And I think that is what Amritpal Singh saw through. He's seen through it. He's calling it out. That's what I interpret this as, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And as I was saying there, the words that I was thinking for descriptors, just for clarity, we're not against all of the evangelists, but more so about these people getting rich on the backs of the believers and creating a whole entertainment enterprise out of what they try to put forward as belief, as worship, as religion, as, the list can go on, Angus. So.
Indeed, and we could talk for a whole show about the evils of extremist religion, but we unfortunately don't have time for that. But anyway, let's move on. Let's leave that subject. And next set of comments, Ashley Kandar, one of our regulars. This was talking about the podcast I did last week with Dr. Bakshi Singh Sandhu. And we were talking about the Constitution. We've talked a lot, obviously, about the Constitution. And Dr. Sandhu went through how the Constitution has been used and abused by the Indian government, particularly the RSS-funded agenda, to essentially legally justify this persecution of Sikhs. And he gave a load of evidence of how the Constitution has been used in a multilateral way in various different parts of society through what they claim was legal means. To persecute, divide up the Punjab geographically, to infiltrate the language, to start persecuting and removing the language, etc. All through constitutional, supported by the Constitution and laws that have allegedly followed the tenets of the Constitution. But Ashley totally disagrees. Ashley says this doctor talks nonsense. And then you commented about every country makes adjustments to boundaries within their country, e.g. for voting purposes. We call it here in the UK gerrymandering. Yes, indeed. Is that quite often governments, through spurious methods, they move boundaries to try and improve their chances of staying in government. This is different, actually, though. In the Punjab, this wasn't about moving boundaries. This was about literally dividing up the Punjab, not once but twice, post-partition. I think that's what Dr. Sandhu was talking about. So I think that's not quite fair to criticise him on that. All Punjabis shouldn't vote in a referendum relating to the future of Punjab, but all Sikhs worldwide should. I'm not sure he said that. I think he was just basically saying that all Sikhs actually should vote in this referendum. That's basically what democracy is about. Look at his eyes and face when he talks. Well, I did for that entire interview. And the man speaks sense. I'm sorry, Ashley. We have to agree to disagree on this one. I think he speaks a lot of sense. He's been a very active campaigner for Khalistan. He's very passionate about what he does. And he genuinely believes in the Khalistan movement for all the reasons that he outlines and that are perfectly sound, James.
Absolutely. And, you can look at it from all of the different angles. And it's always good to get a counterpoint to our show and to your podcast. But at the same time, it's also important to make sure that you are listening to the context, not just the words.
Indeed. And my Akita makes a couple of comments. India needs the great Maharaja Ranjit Singh back. Absolutely it does. And as you say, why has it taken the world so long to listen to the heartache and injustice that the Sikhs have had to suffer? Why doesn't America and Britain stand in against Modi like they do when other leaders are killing the citizens? Probably because there's no oil in India. If I cynically can just comment, there was oil in Iraq, there was oil in Libya, there's oil in places like that. That tends to be the reason why Western leaders militarily step in. They won't step into India for many reasons, one of which is India's actually got quite a large army and therefore doesn't make an easy opponent, so it would actually be quite hard to win that war. They would win, but the cost is too high. Secondly, because the natural resources in India don't justify such a military intervention. So they're doing it by more subtle means, as we've often talked about. Unfortunately, that's the reality of it, James, isn't it?
Absolutely, and even going back to the story earlier, is the power and the outnumbering of the Sikh community when it comes to the RSS and the individual media that's spread the other narrative for so long. That now finally, with the internet and the access to information, it's the truth is coming out.
Yeah, and Love Peace makes a wonderfully cynical comment about the podcast and about the breakup of India. Oh, absolutely, a plethora of legitimate observations. That's a good word, plethora. They pertain to every single state, not just Punjab, of course. What a delightful situation we have in India. Yes, of course, and of course these arguments are not just as you say, particularly pertaining to Punjab. They actually apply, of course, to J&K. We did talk about J&K in the podcast, but they, of course, apply to Manipur, to Tamil Nadu, all these other states that have actually had that very same constitution used against them, used them to persecute the minorities within these states, particularly the Muslims in J&K. And again, we talked in the podcast about how the Indian government is quite happy to tear up the constitution, to literally just remove clauses from the constitution when it suits it, that allowed it to take control of direct control of J&K, that actually had a special reserve status under that same constitution. And yet the Indian government said, you know what, don't care, we'll just remove that from the constitution, which they did, and it was rubber stamped by the Supreme Court, James. So all in all, it's just nonsense from the Indian government.
Absolutely, and let's face it, the Constitution there is more of a recommendation as it is to, being law or something that should be much more enforced.
Indeed, so they've managed to cherry pick the Constitution to suit their own purposes. So, World 22 ID says, thanks for bringing up Maninder Singh, Canada, President of British. Please bring Maninder Singh, Maninder Singh, Canadian President of British Columbia Gurdwara Council, for an interview. It's one for you, James. You can discuss with him the ongoing situation in Canada now, transnational repression, etc. Well, yeah, James, I think that's something you'll have to look into.
I think I may just do that. I've spoken with him previously, so absolutely.
Yeah, we'll look into that. So thank you for that suggestion, and thank you for your kind comment in that as well. And then final comment from TC: excellent podcast, Angus. Well, thank you for watching. Sat Sri Akal, Dr. Sandhu, thank you for revealing the truth about the Indian Constitution and its obscenities. And I think that's exactly the right word. It is obscene how that Constitution was written, and it was written, as we said, by the Brahmins for the Brahmins to maintain Brahmanical control of India and allow them to oppress and persecute the minorities in general. You're absolutely right. The interpretation of the rule of law is far removed from that as we understand it here in the West. Khalistan Zindabad, Raj Karega Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh. Couldn't put it better than myself, James.
Absolutely, Angus. I think that is a perfect note.
And I think that's a great positive note to end on. Khalistan Zindabad, indeed. Always our favourite way to end the show. But thank you once again for watching Perspectives. Do keep those comments coming in. They've been pouring in by the 100 over the end of last week. So thank you so much for all your support. Thank you for so many fascinating comments. We had some really interesting comments. Some great threads actually unfolding under some of those videos from last week. Some really interesting arguments evolving, and a few teddies thrown backwards and forwards at each other, which is always entertaining to watch. But do keep it polite. Don't forget, you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention directly that you don't want to put in the public domain. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching Perspectives for another day. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
And my apologies to folks on the audio. Might be a little off at the beginning. I forgot to switch on the main mic, so it might have a bit of quality issue at the start of the show. My apologies. I did switch over partway through, but hey, thank you for watching and stay safe out there. We'll see you tomorrow.
Indeed, you have been, I'll start that again. You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.